To my older brother, Chris, who has always been an example of how not to live your life. Laughter echoed through the ballroom as my younger brother Brandon raised his glass of champagne on his 30th birthday. I sat there, at the back table with my 7-year-old daughter Emma beside me, feeling every laugh like a punch in the stomach. "Seriously guys, look at him," Brandon continued, pointing directly at me. 35 years old, a single dad, living in an apartment that barely fits a bike. And he has the nerve to show up here wearing the same suit he wore to my wedding 3 years ago. More laughter. Emma tugged at my sleeve, whispering confusedly, "Daddy, why is everyone laughing at you?" My name is Chris. I work as a mechanic in a small garage and have raised my daughter on my own since she was 2, when her mother decided motherhood wasn't for her. It's not a glamorous life, but it's our life. Emma is my priority, my joy, my reason for getting up at 5 every morning. But to my family, especially Brandon and our parents, I've always been the failure. The one who couldn't find his way in life. The one who made bad choices. Brandon has always been the golden boy of the family. He has a degree in business, owns a startup, and is married to Jessica, a successful lawyer whom my parents adore. They live in a house that looks like something out of a magazine and make sure to post every detail of their perfect life on social media. And best of all, Brandon continued his cruel speech, he still believes that one day he'll turn his life around. Dude, you're 35 years old. When are you going to accept that some of us are born to win and others, he paused dramatically, to serve as examples of what not to do? The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my face burn with shame as Emma cringed in her chair. I wanted to leave, grab my daughter, and never come back. I had come because Emma asked me to. She wanted to get to know her dad's family better. That's when Jessica, Brandon's perfect fiancée, slowly stood up. Her face was pale, and she looked at her husband with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was pure disappointment. The room fell silent as she took the microphone from Brandon's hand without asking. If you're enjoying this story of family, revenge, and unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover even more powerful stories. But at that moment, looking into Jessica's eyes, I realized that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything forever. Jessica held the microphone firmly, but didn't speak right away. She just stared at Brandon with an expression I had never seen in her 3 years of marriage. It was as if she was seeing her husband for the first time. Brandon, on the other hand, was still smiling, thinking his wife was going to compliment his cruel performance. "Go on, honey, tell them about the stories Chris used to tell us when he borrowed money." But Jessica didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something. All my life, Brandon has always been the perfect son. 3 years younger than me, he always had it easier. When we were kids, I broke toys trying to understand how they worked. He got new toys. As teenagers, I worked part-time at the supermarket to have my own money. He got double allowance because he got better grades. In college, while I was going into debt with student loans to study mechanical engineering at a state university, my parents paid for Brandon's entire tuition at an elite private school. It's an investment in the family's future, they said. When Emma was born and my ex-girlfriend Sarah disappeared, leaving only a note saying she wasn't ready to be a mother, I thought my family would finally understand. That they would see how hard I was struggling, how I needed emotional support, not financial support. Instead, my mother said, "Well, Chris, you've always had trouble choosing the right people. At least now you'll learn responsibility." Brandon was worse. He told the whole family that I had gotten some girl pregnant who ran away, and that now I was dead weight who was going to drag everyone down. But the truth is, Sarah wasn't some girl. She was a medical student, smart, ambitious. We loved each other. The problem was that when Emma was born, she realized she couldn't balance motherhood with her career dreams. And instead of talking it out like adults, she ran away. Brandon never knew this version of the story. He never asked. For him, it was easier and more convenient to turn me into the failed brother who serves as a negative example. His startup? It was started with a $50,000 loan from our parents. The same amount I borrowed over 2 years to raise Emma on my own, and which I pay back religiously every month, even if it means we eat sausage and pasta 4 times a week. Jessica remained silent, still holding the microphone. The room was starting to get uncomfortable. Some people looked at their cell phones, others whispered to each other. "Jesse." Brandon called, trying to regain control. Are you going to say something or not? That's when she finally opened her mouth. You know I'm a lawyer, right? Specializing in corporate law. And you know that because of that, I have access to a lot of information about companies and their partners. My stomach froze. Not for myself, but for the expression that crossed Brandon's face. For a split second, I saw something I had never seen before: fear. Jessica, honey, I don't think this is the time to. He tried to interrupt. Actually, Brandon, I think this is exactly the right time. She turned to the audience. Because while you were laughing at Chris for being a hard-working single father, I found out some things about my own husband. Things you should know. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of people waiting for a cruel joke. It was the heavy silence of people who sense that something very serious is about to be revealed. Emma tugged at my sleeve again. Dad, why does Aunt Jessica look sad? I didn't know how to answer. But looking at Jessica, seeing the determination in her eyes, I began to understand that this night was far from over. And that maybe, for the first time in my life, someone was finally going to show my family who Brandon really was behind all that perfect facade. What Jessica was about to reveal would change everything. Forever. Do you want to know why I really fell in love with Brandon? Jessica continued, her voice echoing through the silent hall. It was because he told me stories about how he took care of his older brother when they were kids. How he protected Chris from bullies at school. How he shared his allowance when Chris didn't have money for lunch. My stomach sank. Those stories never happened. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. Brandon pulled the microphone back. Jessie, honey, I think you've had too much to drink. How about we continue this at home? But she held her ground. Actually, Brandon, I haven't had anything to drink. Because unlike you, I don't need alcohol to give me the courage to tell the truth. The tension in the air was palpable. Some guests began to shift in their chairs, clearly uncomfortable. Others took out their cell phones, sensing that something was about to happen. For all these years, I had swallowed the family narrative about who we were. Brandon, the responsible son who always made the right choices. Me, the troublemaker who wasted opportunities. But the truth was quite different. When Brandon was 15 and I was 18, our parents traveled abroad for the first time. A 2-week second honeymoon in Europe. They left Brandon in my care, with clear instructions about study schedules and household chores. On the second night, Brandon simply disappeared. He returned 3 days later, drunk, with our mother's car wrecked and a made-up story about being mugged. I spent 72 hours looking for him, calling hospitals, police stations, friends. When our parents returned and found out about the car, Brandon lied. He said I had borrowed it without permission, crashed it, and forced him to take the blame to protect me. Chris threatened me, he said, fake tears in his eyes. He said if I told the truth, he would run away from home and you would never see him again. My parents believed him. After all, I was 18, a rebellious teenager who questioned their rules. Brandon was the obedient son who never caused any trouble. I was grounded for 3 months. I lost the car I had bought with my own money working at the garage. More importantly, I lost my parents' trust forever. That was just the first of many similar incidents over the years. Brandon's startup, Jessica continued, now walking slowly between the tables. Do you know how it really started? With a $50,000 loan from his parents. But do you know why he needed that money? My heart began to race. How did Jessica know that? Because he lost it all gambling online. $63,000 in 6 months. Money he borrowed using Chris's name and forged signature. The room exploded into whispers. Some people looked directly at me, then at Brandon. His face had lost all color. Jessica, stop this now, he shouted, trying to grab the microphone again. She stepped away. Chris never knew. He only found out when he tried to get a loan to buy a bigger house for him and Emma, and was denied because of debts he didn't know existed. Debts that took him 3 years to pay off, working 18 hours a day. It was true. All true. I remembered that terrible day at the bank, the shame of being turned down in front of Emma, who was only 4 at the time and excited about having a backyard to play in. The manager showed me the documents. My signature, or at least something that looked like my signature, on loans totaling over $60,000. I had no way to prove it wasn't me. The dates coincided with a period when Brandon had access to my documents, when he helped organize my papers after Emma was born. At the time, I thought it was some kind of fraud by strangers. I never suspected my own family. And you want to know what's even worse? Jessica continued, her voice now shaking with anger. When Chris finally paid off all those debts, sacrificing every penny he had, Brandon used his brother's clean credit history to get a $50,000 loan from our parents. He said he needed Chris as a co-signer because he had some minor credit issues, but that it was temporary. My head was spinning. For years, Brandon had painted me as the irresponsible brother who couldn't handle money. My parents always mentioned how I complicated things financially, while Brandon was organized and reliable. Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, what's a co-signer?" Before I could answer, Jessica turned directly to me. "Chris, do you remember signing documents to help your brother 3 years ago? Documents that Brandon said were just a formality." I remembered. Brandon had shown up at my house one afternoon with a stack of papers. He said he was expanding his business, that the banks required a co-signer because of some minor red tape in his history. That it was just a formality, that I would never be charged for anything. I signed. Because he was my brother. Because, despite everything, I still wanted to believe we could have a healthy family relationship. "Those documents," Jessica continued, "made you legally responsible for all of his company's debts. If the startup fails, if Brandon can't pay back the loans, you're the first person they'll come after. And he's known that for 3 years." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children stopped running. It was as if 200 people had stopped breathing at the same time. I looked at Brandon. He was no longer trying to grab the microphone. He was just standing there, staring at the floor. That was the moment when something inside me changed completely. It was no longer about my personal dignity. It was about Emma. It was about the fact that if Brandon's company failed, my daughter would lose the stability I had fought so hard to give her. It was about the fact that my own brother had deliberately put my daughter's future at risk to protect his own success. I slowly got up from my chair. Emma looked at me, confused, but I allowed her to remain seated. I walked to the front of the hall, where Brandon and Jessica stood. The entire hall watched me. For the first time in my life, I had the attention of my entire family. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what to say. But what happened next wasn't just a revelation. It was the moment I discovered that Jessica had kept even more secrets about my brother. Secrets that would change everything forever. I walked to the front of the room in complete silence. 200 people were watching me, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt clear. "Jessica," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years. "Do you have copies of these documents?" She nodded, pulling a folder from her purse. "It's all here. Contracts, bank statements, email communications between Brandon and his creditors. Even his conversations with online gamblers where he brags about using his stupid brother's name to get credit." Brandon finally exploded. "Jessica, you're crazy. This is invasion of privacy. You violated my personal files." "Actually," she replied calmly, "as your wife, I have legal access to all of our joint finances. And when I discovered that you had put our house up as additional collateral using false information about Chris's income, I decided that I needed to protect my own financial security." My blood ran cold. "My house is at risk too." "Not directly," Jessica explained. "But if the company goes under and you're sued as a co-signer, they can seize your assets to cover the debts, including any future property you may acquire." Over the next 30 minutes, Jessica continued to reveal details that transformed my understanding of the situation. It wasn't just about money. Brandon had systematically destroyed my reputation in the family for years to protect his own image. When I borrowed money from Emma for emergencies, like when she needed appendicitis surgery, Brandon told everyone I was always asking for help because I didn't know how to manage money. The truth? I never borrowed money. I asked for advance payment for extra work I did fixing family cars. Work that Brandon knew I did for free out of love, but that he reported as desperate favors. He also intercepted her mail, Jessica continued. "Remember when you never got the invitation to Cousin Michael's wedding? Or when you didn't find out about Grandpa's hospitalization until 3 days later? Brandon would pick up her mail at her parents' house and forget to deliver it. Then he would tell everyone that she didn't care about her family. Each revelation was a piece of the puzzle falling into place. Years of feeling excluded, misunderstood, rejected. All orchestrated by my own brother. But it was the next revelation that made me make a final decision. "Chris," Jessica said, her voice growing quieter, "there's something about Emma you need to know." My heart stopped. What about my daughter? Brandon hired a private investigator to find Sarah, Emma's mother, last year. The entire room held its breath. Emma was my world. Anything involving her became a matter of life and death. Did he find her? I asked, my voice coming out hoarser than I expected. Yes. She's living in Portland, working as a resident doctor. Never married, never had any other children. And according to the report, Jessica hesitated. She regularly expresses regret that she abandoned Emma and would like to meet her. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Why would Brandon do that? Because he was planning to use that information as emotional blackmail against you. If you caused trouble over the debts or exposed his lies, he would threaten to bring Sarah back and fight for shared custody. He knew you would do anything to protect Emma from being confused or hurt. At that moment, something inside me changed completely. It wasn't about money, pride, or personal justice anymore. My brother had weaponized my daughter. He had turned the love I feel for Emma into a weapon against me. And that was unforgivable. Brandon noticed the change in my expression. "Chris, I can explain." "No," I said, raising my hand. "You can't explain using my daughter as a pawn in a game you created to keep me submissive." I turned to Jessica. "You said you have all the evidence?" "Everything. Financial documents, correspondence, even recordings of phone conversations where he admits to forging her signature." Recordings. Brandon didn't know our home security system also records audio. 3 months of phone conversations where he brags to his friends about how he keeps his brother in line, and uses his financial situation to make sure he never causes any trouble. I took a deep breath. For my entire adult life, I had lived reactively. Always responding to situations Brandon created, always on the defensive, always trying to prove my worth. Not anymore. "Jessica, are you willing to testify about all this?" "Not just testify. I'm willing to be your partner in this." Brandon tried to intervene again. "You two are crazy. Jessica, you're my wife." "Actually, Brandon," she replied, pulling another document from her briefcase, "as of yesterday, I am your ex-wife. The divorce papers were filed this morning. And as a former partner in all of your companies, I can freely testify about the fraud I witnessed." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children stopped moving. That's when I realized this wasn't just my revenge. Jessica had planned this meticulously. She wasn't just defending me, she was executing her own justice against a man who had cheated 2 families simultaneously. "There's something you two don't know yet," she continued, now smiling for the first time that evening. "The investigation into Sarah? I hired investigators too. To investigate the investigator Brandon hired." She turned to me. "Sarah never knew Brandon found her. But she's been looking for you and Emma for years. She has letters she never sent, gifts she buys every year for Emma's birthday, photos she posts on private social media accounts hoping you'll find her someday." Tears began to well up in my eyes. Not from sadness, but from a complex emotion I couldn't name. "Does she want to meet Emma?" "She wants to apologize to you first. She wants to know if Emma is okay, if she's happy, if you would allow a gradual and healthy contact. She doesn't want disruption, she wants reconciliation." For 3 decades, Brandon had built narratives about who I was, what choices I made, what kind of man I had become. Narratives that made me question my own worth as a father, as a brother, as a human being. But in that room, with Emma sitting at our table watching everything with curious but unafraid eyes, I understood something fundamental. I didn't need my family's approval to be a good father. I already was. And now, finally, I had the resources to prove it. If you've been following this story of family manipulation and shocking discoveries, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply allowing the truth to come to light. Brandon was about to discover that years of manipulation have consequences. And that when you mess with an innocent child's life, you awaken something in the adults who protect them that goes far beyond the pursuit of personal justice. What he didn't know was that Jessica and I already had a plan. A plan that would begin on Monday morning and change not only our lives, but the entire dynamic of our family forever. On Monday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, Brandon received 3 simultaneous phone calls. The first was from the bank, informing him that all business accounts had been frozen due to documentary inconsistencies reported by a guarantor. The second was from the accountant, saying that the IRS had scheduled a full audit for the following week. The third was from the startup's largest client, canceling a $200,000 contract due to integrity issues that have come to our attention. I knew this because Jessica had called me at 9:05, reporting each call in real time. She was monitoring the company phones, legally, since she still had access as a former partner. "He's panicking," she said. "He just called 3 different lawyers. They all refused the case after I mentioned his name." For 3 days, I watched Brandon unravel. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Every document Jessica had provided to the authorities was authentic. Every witness who agreed to speak with me was someone Brandon had wronged over the years, people who had been waiting for an opportunity to tell the truth. The private investigator he hired to find Sarah? We discovered that Brandon had lied about the purpose of the investigation. The man believed he was reuniting a family torn apart by tragic circumstances, not collecting ammunition for emotional blackmail. When Jessica presented the real evidence, he not only returned all the money, but also provided all the recordings of conversations where Brandon explained his true plans for using the information. On Wednesday, Brandon showed up at my shop. He walked in without knocking, his clothes rumpled and his expression a mixture of despair and anger. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt. It was the first time in my life I had seen him without that air of superiority. "You've ruined my life," he said, his voice shaking. "I kept working under the hood of the Ford the first was repairing. Actually, Brandon, you destroyed your own life. I just stopped cleaning up your mess." Jessica is a snake. She planned this from the beginning. Jessica found out who you really were and made a decision. Just like Sarah did 8 years ago. Just like I should have done a long time ago. He approached me, trying to look intimidating. "You can't prove anything. It's just her word against mine." That's when I stood up, wiping my hands on the rag. I walked over to my desk and picked up a folder identical to the one Jessica had used on my birthday. "Brandon, do you remember this signature?" I showed him the first forged loan document. "Look closely at the handwriting. Now compare it to this." I took out a letter he had written to me 5 years earlier, congratulating me on Emma's birthday. Her face drained of color. A handwriting expert can confirm that the same person who wrote "Happy Birthday," Chris, also signed these loan documents. And we have 17 different examples of her handwriting over the years. He tried to grab the papers, but I held them away from him. We also have the phone recordings where you brag about using your idiot brother to get credit. We have the IP logs from your computer accessing online gaming sites using documents with my name on them. We even have the bank surveillance footage of you using a fake ID. Brandon staggered backward, leaning against the wall. "But the best part," I continued, "is that we found out about our parents' money. You know, the $50,000 they lent you to invest in the company? You lied about that too." "What are you talking about?" "Our parents never gave you $50,000, Brandon. They gave you $20,000. You forged the rest of the loan using my signature as additional collateral. So basically, you took $30,000 in my name without my knowledge to supplement the loan our parents actually gave you." His breathing became uneven. That's not possible. "How did you find out?" "Because Jessica isn't just a corporate lawyer. She specialized in financial fraud before she married you. And when she decided to investigate your finances for the divorce," I smiled for the first time in the conversation. "Let's just say you left a very easy trail to follow." It was at that moment that Brandon finally understood the extent of what he was facing. It wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about years of criminal behavior documented by an expert in detecting exactly that type of crime. "You have a choice," I said. "We can settle this between families, or we can let the judicial system settle it. What do you want?" "First, you will sign a full confession of all the fraud you have committed against me. Second, you will transfer ownership of the company to a trust that will pay off all fraudulent debts in my name. Third, you will pay for therapy for Emma to deal with the emotional turmoil your blackmail of Sarah has caused her." He opened his mouth to protest, but I continued. Fourth, you will write letters of retraction to all family members explaining the lies you have told about me for years. And fifth, I paused, looking him in the eye. You will give me Sarah's real contact information so that I can decide, as Emma's father, if and when to establish a healthy relationship. And if I refuse? I took out my phone and showed him a number. This is the prosecutor responsible for financial crimes in the county. Jessica has already sent him a complete dossier. You have 72 hours to decide whether you want to cooperate or face criminal charges that could result in up to 15 years in prison. Brandon looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the documents scattered across the table. You'd really do that? Destroy your own brother? Brandon, I said, my voice completely calm, you spent 30 years destroying me piece by piece. The difference is that I'm giving you a chance to survive the consequences of your own choices. In that moment, for the first time in our relationship, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the consequences of decades of manipulation finally catching up with him. That's when I realized that the most effective revenge wasn't to destroy him. It was simply to stop protecting him from the natural consequences of his own actions. The real twist was yet to come. Because while Brandon was coming to terms with his limited options, I already knew that Sarah was driving from Portland that very afternoon, not to cause trouble, but to apologize to me in person and meet the daughter she had left behind. And Emma, my brave 7-year-old daughter, already knew that an important conversation was coming. Because unlike the adults in our family, I had never lied to her about who she was or where she came from. What happened in the next 72 hours changed not only my family, but my entire concept of forgiveness, justice, and what it really means to protect the people you love. 71 hours later, Brandon showed up at my workshop with a folder of documents and the eyes of someone who hadn't slept in 3 days. I'll sign everything, he said, placing the papers on my desk. Full confession, transfer of the company, letters of retraction to the family. Everything. I felt no triumph. I felt no satisfaction. Looking at my younger brother, his hair unkempt and his clothes rumpled, I saw only a man who had spent decades building a life based on lies and was now facing the consequences. What about Sarah? I asked. He handed me a card with contact information. She's at the hotel downtown. She arrived yesterday. Jessica has already spoken with her. She really wants to see you, Chris. And meet Emma. That afternoon, I drove to the hotel with Emma in the back seat, humming a song she had learned at school. She didn't seem nervous, just curious. Throughout her life, I had been honest with her about her origins. She knew she had a biological mother who had made a difficult choice when she was very young. Daddy, she said when we pulled up, is she going to live with us now? No, sweetheart. She just wants to meet you and apologize. Our family is still you and me. But maybe we'll have a new friend. Sarah was waiting in the lobby. Short brown hair, a doctor's coat draped over her arm, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she stood up immediately. Chris, her voice came out hoarse. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Emma hid behind my legs for a few seconds, then approached with the natural curiosity of children. Are you my biological mother? Sarah knelt down to her height. Yes, I am. And you're even more beautiful than I imagined. Why did you leave? Emma's direct question made Sarah take a deep breath. Because I was very young and very scared. I didn't think I knew how to be a mother. But that doesn't mean I didn't think about you every day. For the next 2 hours, we talked in a nearby cafe. Sarah didn't try to justify her departure, didn't ask for dramatic forgiveness or promise miraculous changes. She simply explained that she had graduated from medical school, was working in Portland, had never married, and for years had been looking for a way to find us without traumatizing Emma. I don't want to interfere, she said. You've built a beautiful life together. I'd like to be a part of it, if you'll let me. Letters, phone calls, maybe occasional visits. Emma, with the simple wisdom of a 7-year-old, asked, Do you like pepperoni pizza? Sarah laughed for the first time in the conversation. I love it. Then you can have dinner with us on Friday. And just like that, in a completely natural way, our little family gained a new member. Not a replacement, not a disruption, just a kind and respectful addition. The following week, Brandon's letters of retraction arrived to all family members. They weren't superficial texts or empty apologies. Jessica had insisted that he detail every lie he had told about me, every manipulation, every occasion when he had deliberately damaged my reputation. My grandfather Norman was the first to call me. "Chris, my boy, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned those stories years ago." My mother took longer. 3 weeks later, she showed up at the workshop unannounced. She entered hesitantly, as if unsure whether she would be welcome. "Chris," she said, her voice small, "I read Brandon's letter. All the letters. And I need to apologize." I stopped working and turned to look at her. For 35 years, I had waited for this moment. Now that it was happening, I felt only a strange calm. "Mom, you believed him because you wanted to believe him. Because it was easier to have one troubled son and one perfect son than to accept that we are all complex human beings." She began to cry. "I failed as a mother." "You failed as a judge," I corrected her. "But it's not too late to start being just my mother." Brandon's company was liquidated to pay off the fraudulent debts in my name. There was enough left for him to start over in another state, far from the temptation to manipulate people who knew him. Jessica kept only the apartment they had bought together, sold the rest, and used the money to open a law practice specializing in helping victims of family fraud. "Apparently," she told me 3 months later, during one of the weekly dinners we had established, "your story is not as unusual as we thought. I have 15 similar cases this year alone." Emma grew 6 inches and lost 2 teeth during that time. Sarah kept her promise: monthly letters, weekly phone calls, visits every other month. She never tried to be the real mom, just Sarah, an important adult who loved Emma and respected our dynamic. A year after the birthday that changed everything, Emma and I were planning her 8th birthday party. Sarah was coming from Portland. Jessica was bringing dessert. My grandfather Norman promised to tell his war stories. My mother asked if she could help with the decorations. "Daddy," Emma said as we blew up balloons, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because you seem different. More, taller." She was right. I felt taller. Not physically, but in some fundamental way. For decades, I had carried the weight of proving my worth to people who had decided I was worthless. Now, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, I no longer had to bow under that weight. "You know what the hardest part of all this has been?" I asked Emma as we tied balloons. "What?" "Learning that I didn't need their approval to be a good father to you." She smiled that toothless smile that melted my heart. "I always knew you were the best dad." That night, after Emma went to sleep, I sat on the small balcony of our apartment with a beer and reflected on the year that had passed. Brandon didn't destroy my life. He just revealed what kind of life I was living. A life where I accepted crumbs of respect, where I normalized family cruelty, where I taught my daughter that we should tolerate people who hurt us just because we share DNA. The real revenge wasn't exposing Brandon or seeing him face consequences. It was discovering that I deserved people in my life who see me, value me, and treat me with basic dignity. It was building a real community around Emma, where she would grow up understanding that love is not conditional or competitive. Brandon unintentionally taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that family is not about blood, it's about choice. And people who consistently choose to hurt us do not deserve access to our energy, no matter how they are related to us. 2 years later, Brandon sent me a Christmas card. He was living in Denver, working as a consultant, going to therapy. The message was simple: "Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better person." I didn't respond right away. Not out of anger, but because I didn't feel an urgent need to reconnect. I had found peace in the distance, and maybe that was the healthiest relationship we could have. Eventually, I sent back, "I'm glad you're doing well. Take care." If this story of family manipulation and regaining dignity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about people who refuse to accept disrespectful treatment and transform their lives completely. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply to live well. Today, Emma is 10 years old. She plays soccer, plays the violin, and corrects me when I use obsolete slang. Sarah is a regular part of our lives, not as a mother figure, but as a medical mentor who teaches Emma about science and anatomy. Jessica has become my best friend and occasionally my legal advisor when clients have problems with dishonest repair shops. My mother comes over for dinner once a month. She still slips up occasionally, comparing or making inappropriate comments, but now I correct her immediately, and she learns. Healthy relationships require clear boundaries and consistent consequences. The shop has grown. I hired 2 mechanics and a receptionist. Not because I've become rich or famous, but because I've learned to value my own work and charge fair prices for quality services. I'm not a different person. I'm the same person I've always been, but now I'm surrounded by people who recognize and respect who I am. The transformation wasn't internal, it was environmental. And Emma? She's growing up knowing she deserves respect, that she can trust the adults around her, and that real family is built through consistent love, not tolerance of abuse. At the last school meeting, the teacher commented that Emma has exceptional self-esteem for her age. She always talks about her father with such pride, she said. It's rare to see a child so secure in the love she receives at home. Driving home that afternoon, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Emma drawing in the back seat, tongue out in concentration, completely absorbed in creating something beautiful. That's not the ending any of us expected when that terrible night began 2 years ago, not with dramatic revenge or epic confrontations, but with the simple, extraordinary dignity of a life well lived, surrounded by people who choose to love us properly. Because in the end, the best response to those who try to diminish us is not to become smaller. It's to grow so big that they simply can't reach us anymore.